Well, there he is, Jeff. Good to see you again, sir. Hope all is well. We talked recently about leadership and how leadership kind of sets the tone for a team, and the importance of that. Having leaders that you gravitate toward and things of that stature. What kind of attributes? Today we're going to take a little bit different shift, look a little bit more balcony view-esque, and look at company leadership and its impact. The importance of company leaders setting the tone, setting the vision, getting people's buy-in, but also just the difference it makes for people like us who are, trying to make things happen on the front lines. So, Jeff, what are your thoughts? Frame up the importance of company leadership and how it sets the tone for everybody else that reports up to these folks and tries to follow their vision.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Carson. I think I'll have my own. I'm a startup guy, so I'll kind of come at this from the perspective of working in smaller companies. I'd love to hear your perspective and working in a larger organization. For me, I think there's a lot of different things where I could go with this, but first and foremost, when you work in a startup, your leader, your founder is really, at the end of the day, kind of beholden to the investors. And that's true in any company, but I think it's particularly felt in a smaller organization because the investors really all have disproportionate influence on the leadership team and the founder in particular. And so you really, I think, want to index for someone who is really knowledgeable, I think, about how to grow a business and the metrics and sets reasonable expectations with investors. The worst case scenario you can have is when that person is not able to give the right pushback, they're not able to set the right expectations, because what will end up happening is there will be a big trickle down effect on the rest of the team. And people will start getting pulled in a lot of different directions because the founder may or may not have made promises that they couldn't keep. So I think you need people that are very disciplined in terms of the expectations that they set with their investors. They're very reasonable. They're measured. They're not selling something that's like selling the moon and beyond, because that's something that they have to kind of pay the piper eventually, right? So I think that that's something that's critically important. I also think, again, you'll see this in larger organizations as well, but in smaller teams, you really need to set your North Star. Like, what are you working toward, and what are your culture and your values? I've worked in places where this was done quite well. Um, and we would literally like post it on the wall. Like, these are the things that we care about. And I still remember some of these mantras from companies I worked at where it was like, go to the source and, seek truth, for example. Like, these are things that were really important to the company. But I've also worked in places where, despite the leadership team sitting down to like, think about what our culture and our values were, the leadership team never implemented them. So we literally wasted like 2 days to just talk about this, and then we never actually implemented, values that would trickle down to the rest of the company. And it kind of leaves you in like a rudderless ship. You don't really know. Culture is not really well defined in those places, and the vibes can be a little bit weird or a little bit off as a result. So I think that that's something that's really important. I also just think transparency is super key. Transparency, I've worked in a lot of startups where in the company all hands, the finance leader will literally show like how much time do we have till we run out of money. And that's something that's scary for people to see, but it's important for everyone to know. Like, how, like, and I think being transparent about it is a good thing because we're all adults and you signed up to work at a startup for a reason. You can handle it, the high blood pressure or whatever. So you want people to be honest with you, because where you actually build distrust and where you start to get paranoid is when you suspect that something is wrong. Because if they won't tell you about it, then it must be really bad. So that's when people start, having wayward eyes and start gossiping and things like that. But I think transparency is really key. Transparency to the entire company about why we make the decisions that we're making. And I think also that goes down to things like the cap table, being able to be transparent about how the cap table works to your key executives, things like that. I mean, they're coming in with this pipe dream that, stock and equity might be worth something down the road. So they want to understand, the breakdown of how that works and how that functions. So I'd say those are like the key tenets. It's being able to navigate dealing with investors and your board, setting the right expectations with them and therefore the rest of the company. It's the culture and the values and actually defining those with the leadership team and instilling those in the people in the company. And then it's also just transparency. It's being able to treat everyone like adults. It's sharing what would otherwise be sensitive information in larger organizations, because that's what people get in return for taking the risk. They deserve to be in the know. So for me, as a startup guy, those would be the things that I value in the executive leadership. I'd love to hear your perspective coming from a larger organization. What do you value when you think about the leaders in a larger organization?
Yeah, I love the topic, Jeff. I think you hit on some that will be some commonalities. I think too, because I tend to compare and contrast. I've worked for some very small organizations and I've worked for a couple of very large organizations. And some of the things that you said really resonated with me around like, how do the executives carry themselves, and then how transparent are they with the organization? How do they set the vision? How do they live and breathe the vision, and show up? Who's the face of the organization? Obviously, these leaders, they have, they answer to someone, whether they're answering to the board or to shareholders, or they're answering to different folks that have invested in those organizations. You're typically answering to someone, and I think the danger is when lip service is paid to what you've defined as the company culture. Like you mentioned, and I vividly remembered I had a flashback to where we, at a small organization that I worked at, we carved out all of this mission statement stuff. And then, it just goes by the wayside when stuff hits the fan. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that some smaller organizations can run into. But large organizations can get very disjointed. Things can happen in silos. And that's why it's all the more important that you can see the symmetry and you can see how you're part of the larger organization. And so I think great company leadership does a great job of ensuring that people understand their role, feel included in what's transpiring. I work for an organization where a lot of very shrewd moves have been made over the last several years in the ways of acquisitions. Some that even, when I read about them at the time, I'm like, huh. But then, you see it play out, and you understand how it feeds the larger picture. So, over time, a great company leader is going to, I think, earn the trust of their teams. They are going to be a public face, but they're also going to be transparent and communicative with their teams. They're going to be present when there's challenges. I work in an organization where there's global relationships that our senior leaders have, and they're very prevalent on, social media, on the news. So those types of things, it's good to see those folks out there because it builds trust and transparency. But furthermore, creating a culture that becomes a destination organization. You want to attract talent. You want to get people into the boat. And there's a lot of people that I think are very attracted to wanting to work in this organization for those types of reasons, because there's a history of strategic decisions that have been made. And it's an organization that's made a lot of positive strides over the last several years. I will also say, one of the things that I look at as a part of this is, when I think about the importance of company culture, it's do I, as a individual contributor, or as a leader, do I kind of see that clear vision? I've done a lot of reading over the last, several months of Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek does a really good job of breaking down some of these things, especially organizations that are operating in a finite mindset, trying to win quarter to quarter, and those that are trying to play the long game. And I think if you're working for a good organization, they're going to find the right way to balance and optimize both. We do owe quarterly earnings reports to Wall Street. These are important. There's a lot riding on that, but we've got to play the long game. We've got to make these big bets that are going to sustain and lead to growth and innovation for the long haul. And I think that's where sometimes organizations can lose focus. is when they become beholden to just the finite game and just winning in the moment and the quarter to quarter and doing what feels good. I worked for a small organization. I mean, these guys walked around like they were masters of the universe until, of course, it went belly up and they had no money, and then it was a fire sale. So it's you've got to be very careful as an organization and frankly as a group of company leaders to make sure that you're setting that right tone, but that you're doing the right balance between serving the master, the immediate master, the quarterly, the monthly, whatever it is, because I get those pressures just like everybody else, but also making sure that you're playing the long game. You're looking at the year and you're looking at the team and the ingredients that are going to set you up for success for the years to come.
Love that. Yeah, and I love that last point too, just about playing the long game. And I've seen that in startup world, it's always about just showing a curve up and to the right. But sometimes you have to take one step backwards to take two step forwards. And you have to think about the long term. And I've seen that happen all the time. So I very much echo that sentiment.
Always a good one, Jeff. Thank you, as always, for the time and your insights. We'll see you next time.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right.